Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go back. Way back, in fact. And today we're going to be redesigning the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, which if you are a web developer like me, you've probably played around with to see how popular websites used to look like 5-10 years ago. Maybe get a little bit of inspiration and kind of be reminded that even the biggest websites in the world did kind of look like a mess at some point. If you're not a web developer, this is still quite an interesting tool. As you see here, I've got MySpace loaded up, and I can browse back way into like 2011 to see how it used to look and get hit with a little wave of nostalgia. But all things considered, although this is one of the most interesting tools on the internet, it's by far one of the most poorly designed tools. And I'm not throwing any shade here. It seems like they may be a volunteer organization, given this the Internet Archive, but there's definitely some room for improvement in these navigation controls and just the overall flow for searching for and finding a website's past history. So we're going to take a stab at redesigning that today. And as always, we've got our lovely little style guide here using our spattering of blacks and gray hues for the main body text and maybe some background elements. We've got our accent colors, which I've taken straight from their site. And it looks like they're just using base Helvetica, which is great for performance reasons. And if you just want a simple aesthetic, I don't really like leaning on Helvetica too much because it just makes your designs feel a little bit elementary. And a little too simple. So we're leaning on a lovely font called Aileron, which looks very similar to Helvetica. It's got those nice thin strokes, but it has a lot more kind of tuning around the edges. It looks a lot more modern. So here we have our user stories. As a user, I really just want to look up older versions of any site of which I'm interested. And I want to see how those sites evolved over time and then download those images of the past versions of the site just in case I want to have them on hand for reference or frame them on the wall as a reminder that even some of the biggest sites on the world once had pretty outlandish designs. So this will be a really interesting one. I haven't really designed something that's this involved of kind of a timeline feature before. So we'll see how it comes out. Obviously we've got this double navigation to handle at the start here. So we'll get all that sorted. Then we'll dive straight into the timeline feature and see what we come up with. So hang in there, folks. I'll be back in touch in a couple of hours. Who knows? Took me way too long to implement this primary and secondary navigation and pick all the fonts and all that, so I'll be skipping over most of it. But I just want to stress that it's really a worthy task to spend a lot of time designing a navigation because it's really just the map for a website. Like, it's how people navigate the site. So it's important you get the UX correct. And I do want to also stress that for this particular site, there's way too many links in the header. Or at least there's way too many links in the first layer on the header. They really should be organized in some way with maybe drop-down menus or something. And but that's a task for another day. Here I'm just going to take everything as it is right now, add a layer of UX polish, and kind of see what we come up with. As you can see, I'm going to use a lot of similar patterns that you've seen in previous UIs where there's kind of 2 layers of navigation, but I won't force you to watch all of that again, so we'll just zoom forward a little bit. Perhaps this is a crutch that I rely on a little bit too much, but whenever I'm designing a homepage hero or some kind of landing page, I always have a big piece of header text because that pulls the user's attention and ultimately explains the purpose of the landing page, right? What's in this for me? And for this flow, what's in it for me is the ability to see websites throughout their time in history, right? And then pulling me directly to that specific search container down below is kind of what I need this flow to do. So I'm leveraging the text and then attaching a input just below it to pull people's attention to exactly where it needs to go. A little side note here, you'll notice that the majority of the flow so far has been left aligned, or that's the implication of the navigation, right? So whenever you put some kind of other component right below that, if it's not also left aligned, it generates a lot of uncertainty in the user's, I guess, visual understanding of the page. So we can get around that by making the container that element's contained in, the centered element, a subtle gray. So we kind of send the signal, hey, we're still using the full width here, but we're just intentionally centering this component because it makes sense for us at this time. Obviously, one of the main problems with the existing UI is that you just kind of don't have any options besides typing something into that search box. But what if you just want to browse and you're just interested in learning a little more about something, but you don't necessarily know what to look for? Having this popular searches container down here lets users kind of engage in that joyful browsing of the internet's history without having to do much thinking on their own. Generally speaking, when you're including raw images in a product UI, especially if you let the user upload those images, you kind of want to have some control over how they're perceived in the larger, experience of using the app. So putting an overlay, a dark overlay, or a nice gray background like you saw in previous episodes is a good way to maintain that control, and it's a pattern that is very useful to have in your toolkit for pretty much any product UI. Again, just kind of abusing the information hierarchy here with a huge piece of text that says myspace.com. I don't want any ambiguity to exist to the user as to what they're actually looking at here. And it's going to be a history of how MySpace looked throughout time. So that just kind of makes everything very obvious to the user. Whenever you have a situation where you have contextual controls, such as these previous and next links, but you also want to give the user some utility controls that aren't necessarily used all the time, a really useful pattern is just to put a vertical separation bar between the controls you expect them to use all the time and the controls they use situationally. And that way there's kind of an implication sent to the user like, oh, okay, these are the main controls, and these are secondary controls that I can use whenever it makes sense. It's a really useful pattern whenever you have something that's very contextual that maybe only shows on certain parts of the UX, but you still want it to appear in the same place because you've already established that affordance with the user that this is where the controls are. All right, there we go. I think we have, at this point, kind of achieved a similar goal to what they're trying to achieve with the Internet Archive, but in a manner that's much more focused on the user's experience using the platform. So we've got this behemoth navigation here with just lots of different links. Definitely this needs to be polished up, like someone needs to take a serious look at the information architecture on the site generally, but all things considered, we've got the primary navigation up here, and then the secondary navigation to switch the context in which you're viewing the results. I think this makes a lot of sense. And then we have kind of the main focus of the web archive, meaning being just to search for a site. And if you don't really know what to search and you're just here browsing for fun, here's some popular websites that people like to look at in their history. So if you click on one, of course, you see the individual result, and you're able to then search more results from this experience and then actually go through and navigate back in time, or download a screenshot that represents that particular moment in time. So all in all, I think this is a much better flow. Here we are comparing it to the previous version, where there's just a lot going on, lots of really confusing controls, very difficult to navigate, and ultimately it doesn't really pull me through the experience in a way that I would kind of want it to. And then here we have the new one, much more modern, lots good use of spacing, good use of pulling my attention to exactly where it needs to go so that I can do the thing I want to do, which is ultimately look at the history of the internet as a whole. So hope you found this one interesting. I've still got a whole bunch of ideas to comb through over the next couple of weeks, but if you do have a website you'd like me to redesign, particularly one that has a little bit more of a holiday theme, as you can see we're getting in the spirit here at Demystifying Design, I'd love to hear about it. Pop it in a comment and we'll see if we can get it sorted in the next video. But until then, have a wonderful week and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.